If you think you've heard some creepy funeral home stories before, get ready. The ones I'm about to tell you go way beyond weird, straight into downright disturbing. Like the next story, where a filthy rich family turned a simple funeral into something so grotesque that even the staff started questioning their own sanity. But before we dive into it, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of our terrifying stories. And drop a comment letting me know which city or country you're watching from. You could smell it even before opening the door to the viewing room. It wasn't the typical scent of wilted flowers, extinguished candles, or polished wood. It was something else. Something that clung to your nose, heavy, somewhat sweet, like meat left in the sun. And even without understanding why, I knew right away that this would be one of the worst shifts of my life. Working at a luxury funeral home in a city like ours has its oddities. I've seen families bring photos of celebrities as references for the deceased's makeup. I've had to embalm an entire horse because it was a famous politician's pet. And I've even had to recreate a hospital room inside the chapel because the lady wanted to die with the same view. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on that cloudy Tuesday when the Lacerda family came to us. The first thing that caught my attention was the silence. Not the respectful kind of mourning silence, but something cold. Every family member had the same expression, hard, emotionless, as if they had rehearsed it. The patriarch, Mr. Ernest Lacerda, had died the night before. According to the youngest son, he went to sleep and never woke up. 78 years old, weak heart, eccentric billionaire, normal. But it didn't take long for me to realize that this funeral would be completely out of the ordinary. It started with the casket. They demanded a custom-made model, polished black wood with matte gold details, and a secret compartment embedded in the base, and they didn't explain why. Then came the suit. They had it delivered by a tailor from out of the country, who arrived with a sealed garment bag and specific instructions. Open only at the moment of dressing the body. Do not expose to air for too long. That alone should have set off alarms, but when we opened the package, the smell exploded as if someone had burst a bag of rotten meat inside the room. At first glance, it was a beautiful suit. Dark, elegant, perfect stitching. But the lining, it was human skin. It had texture, it had a smell, it had pores, and handmade stitching that seemed more ritualistic than aesthetic. At first, I thought it was some artificial replica, but the smell didn't lie. And to make matters worse, the skin was starting to decompose. You could see dark spots forming on the edges and moisture building up in the fabric. One of the assistants even vomited. I nearly fainted myself. We called the family trying to explain that it would be impossible to use that on the body. But the response was direct. It was his final wish. It must not be replaced. We spent over an hour trying to fit the suit on Ernest's body without contaminating ourselves with the smell. We had to isolate the room, use double gloves, and even then, the odor seeped into everything. I was left with the feeling that it wasn't just a piece of clothing, but some kind of cocoon, as if Ernest hadn't died, but was just waiting for something to happen inside it. And then came the music. The eldest daughter brought an original score that, according to her, had been composed by Ernest himself in his final days. An exclusive arrangement, designed to guide the soul during the final crossing. Beautiful in theory, but upon reading the notes, it was clear that something was off. The music was written in an unusual key, with indications of long pauses, broken measures, and an instrument no one knew. Stansel Flal. None of the hired musicians had any idea what that was. We searched catalogs, online forums, old archives. Nothing. The family, impatient, suggested we replace the instrument with a transverse flute, with a soft and melancholic timbre. We agreed. We had no choice. During the rehearsal, the sound that came out was simply uncomfortable. The melody was dissonant, broken, almost aggressive at times. It reminded me of those horror movie soundtracks where the sound seems to be scratched from within. With each repetition of the music, the musicians grew more tense. One of them even said he felt pressure in his chest when playing the flute part. Meanwhile, the family's requests continued. The strangest was when the deceased's grandson walked into the preparation room and, with the utmost naturalness, asked if it would be possible to stuff his grandfather's groin area, as if he were asking to adjust a collar. When we asked why, he simply replied, "It's an important symbol for us. He needs to be complete." They didn't explain further. They just handed us a small sealed package with contents they wouldn't let us see, and precise instructions on where and how to insert it. From that point on, the tension became physical. The entire environment grew heavier, as if the air had thickened. The staff began complaining of headaches, dizziness, even nightmares, even those who hadn't directly participated in the body's preparation. And the smell, that unbearable smell, began to spread throughout the building. We cleaned everything with strong products, but it returned. It always returned. It started clinging to the walls, the clothes, the skin. The night before the funeral, I was alone in the chapel making the final adjustments, and I swear on everything, I heard the music, not from afar, not from a radio, inside the chapel. The same melody with the substitute flute, even though no one was there to play it. It seemed like the sounds were coming from the casket itself, and along with the sounds came that feeling, the feeling of being watched, as if Ernest were in there, listening, waiting, almost breathing, and I still didn't know the worst of it. On the day of the funeral, the room was packed. The Lacerda family spared no expense. Arrangements of rare flowers, enormous candles carved with symbols no one could explain, musicians in suits playing that cursed score. But the atmosphere wasn't one of mourning. It was something else. Some people were smiling. Others seemed nervous, as if they were about to witness a spectacle rather than a farewell. Everything seemed meticulously rehearsed, down to the glances. When they opened the casket, the smell invaded the room completely. Some guests discreetly covered their noses. Others simply pretended not to notice, but you could see it in their eyes. Everyone felt it. Ernest was in there, dressed in that filthy suit, the skin already sinking in some parts and the lapel fabric darkening, as if the lining were merging with him. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was as if something in that scene pulled at my attention. Something that said, "You need to see this." The music started soon after. The flute entered the second movement of the score. The sound cut through the air like a blade. It was sharp, tense, slightly out of tune, but intentional. It didn't seem like a mistake, it seemed like a summoning. The flutist began to sweat. His hands trembled and he missed some notes, but no one interrupted. The family seemed too absorbed, eyes closed, as if in a trance. The sound of the flute seemed to fill every corner of the chapel, reverberating off the walls like a voice trying to escape. And then came the strangest part. The candles began to flicker, even without wind. The air grew colder, and I swear I saw a light mist form near the casket. Some people started looking around, restless. The flutist stopped for a second, coughing uncontrollably, as if something had grabbed his throat. The music stopped. An eerie silence took over the room, and then a snap was heard, dry, coming from inside the casket. The sound wasn't loud, but it was clear, like wood moving, or bones. A murmur of voices spread through the chapel. The flutist dropped the instrument on the floor and ran out. One of the musicians fell from his chair. But the family stood up, motionless, all of them, looking at the casket with an expression, satisfied. I had never seen anyone look at a dead person like that. One of the grandsons, the same one who had brought the package to be stuffed, walked up to the casket, took a small round mirror from his pocket, and held it above his grandfather's face. No one understood, but he didn't say a word. He just held the mirror there, waiting, until, for a moment, the mirror fogged up, as if someone had breathed from inside the casket. And there I knew. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was some kind of ritual. Something had been activated, and the spiritual presence that spread at that moment didn't seem to want to leave. The funeral ended in absolute silence. No speeches, no tears, just the interrupted music, and the feeling that something had been left unfinished. When the guests left, the family called us back into the room. They said the body shouldn't be cremated, nor buried in a public cemetery. They had bought a remote property where Ernest would be placed in an underground mausoleum, built especially for him, and they wanted us to handle the transportation ourselves. It's important that he be complete, they said. I refused. For the first time, I said no to a client. That had gone too far. One of my colleagues, desperate for money, accepted. He went the following week with 2 of the family's security guards and the body. He never came back to work with us. He never answered the phone again. He vanished. They say he moved to another state, that he joined some strange religion, that he could never sleep with the lights off again. I don't know what's true, but I understand. There are things people shouldn't see. There are supernatural experiences that stick to the soul. And the smell remained. Even after a complete cleaning of the chapel, replacing the furniture, repainting the walls. Every time I entered that room, I smelled the same thing. Rotten, damp, almost sweet. As if he were still there. As if that suit still exhaled on its own. As if the so-called post-death art hadn't ended. And perhaps it hasn't. Today, every time I pass by that property where they built the mausoleum, I feel a chill down my spine. There's something wrong there. As if the air vibrates slightly. As if someone whispers behind me but never has the courage to speak up. And sometimes I think, how far can money take a family? How far does the madness of a man who refuses to truly die go? I don't know the answer. I only know that that funeral wasn't a farewell. It was an opening, a beginning. And I was there, right in the center of it all. Creepy, right? What did you think of that one? On a scale from 0 to 10, how scary was it? Let me know your rating in the comments. It's wild to think how far some families will go to turn a funeral into some kind of twisted performance. While some go over the top with luxury, others come face to face with raw, silent fear. Like in the next story, where a simple night shift turns into a nightmare no one would ever forget. I had never been inside a funeral home after hours. During the day, it's strange, but at night, it becomes a whole different world. It was a Tuesday night. I was 29 years old, had been unemployed for a few months, and took this job out of desperation. The ad was straightforward. Wanted responsible person to watch over a viewing room for one night. Cash payment the next day. I called and agreed right away. The guy on the other end didn't even ask for my full name. He just said, "Be there at 8. It's at Leach Funeral Home, room 3. You just need to stay there until dawn. Don't touch anything. Don't leave the room. Just stay there. The payment is guaranteed." I arrived at Leach around 7:40. A small town in the heart of Texas. One of those that seems stuck in time. The funeral home was an old dark red brick building with tall windows and frosted glass. A crooked sign indicated the faded name, Leach Funeral Home. I was greeted with a nod. A thin man in a worn-out suit gave me the key to the room and said only, "Everything's ready. The body arrived this afternoon." I asked if there were any more instructions. He just replied, "Don't talk to him." Don't talk to him who? But before I could ask, he had already turned his back. Room 3 was at the end of the hallway. The walls were covered with that yellowed beige wallpaper smelling of mildew. The ceiling had some dry water stains, and the lamp was one of those weak fluorescent ones that flicker before fully turning on. When I entered, I saw the casket in the center. Closed, dark brown, well-crafted. Around it, wooden benches and some folding chairs. In the corner, an old dark wood cabinet and a small table with an old telephone. That was it. I sat in one of the chairs and tried to pass the time with my cell phone. Of course, the signal was terrible. 3 minutes later, the phone died. I swear it had 80% battery when I arrived. I tried to turn it on again. Nothing. At first, the silence was bearable. But after a while, I started to hear some light tapping, as if someone was tapping their fingers on the walls. I looked around, thinking it could be plumbing noise or an animal, but the tapping continued, rhythmic, coming from the left side of the room. Then it moved to the cabinet. I stayed still, listening. The lamp started to hum louder, flickering slightly. I stood up and went to the cabinet. I touched the door. It was cold, like ice. I pressed my ear against it. That's when I heard the breathing. It wasn't mine. It was slow, deep, as if someone was inside breathing with difficulty. My heart raced. I took a step back. The lamp went out for 2 seconds and came back on. The air was heavier. It felt like the room had shrunk. I sat down again, trying to keep calm. I thought about leaving, but the contract was clear. If I left the room, I would lose the payment. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes for a few minutes. When I opened them, the casket had moved. It wasn't my head. It wasn't an illusion. It had changed position. It was slightly turned to the left, and the lid was ajar. A finger. I swear on everything sacred, there was a finger out. A purple, swollen finger with a darkened nail sticking out of the gap. My vision started to blur. I felt my legs tingle. I didn't know whether to scream or vomit. I stayed there, frozen. The air was thick with such dense negative energy that it felt like I was underwater. Then came the whispers. First low, like the wind blowing words. Then clearer. A deep, distorted voice speaking words I didn't understand. They came from the walls, from the cabinet, from the floor, from inside the casket. The shadows in the room began to move on their own. It wasn't a trick of the light. They elongated, changed position, came near me. I saw a shadow touch my leg. I jumped up. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. I tried to use the phone on the small table. Dead. No dial tone. I went back to my cell phone. Dead. Everything was dead. And then I felt it. A spiritual presence. As if someone was right behind me. I felt the warm air on my neck. I heard breathing. When I turned, there was no one. But the casket. Now it was open. Completely open. And empty. I didn't think twice. I ran to the door, locked. I started to knock, scream, kick, but it seemed like no one could hear me. The room was swallowing me alive. The light flickered non-stop. The cabinet started to shake. The chairs dragged themselves to form a circle around the casket. I screamed in despair, but all that came out of my mouth was a whisper. As if the room had sucked my voice away. My ears started to ring. The feeling of being watched was so strong that it felt like I was surrounded by eyes. The floor trembled slightly, and then everything stopped. Total silence. A silence that hurts the ears. I stayed there on my knees in the middle of the room, too scared even to blink. That's when I saw it. In the corner near the cabinet, a figure, tall, thin, with arms too long for its body. It had no face, just a stretched gray skin, and that moved towards the casket. It got in. The lid closed slowly, as if nothing had happened. I blacked out. I fainted from pure terror. When I woke up, sunlight was already coming through the windows. The room was silent. The casket closed in the same place, the cabinet, quiet. Everything seemed normal, as if the whole night had been a delusion. But I knew. I felt. I saw. I left the room staggering. Outside, the same man from the beginning was waiting for me. He handed me an envelope with the money and said, without even looking at my face, "Now you understand why no one stays 2 nights." I went home that same day. 2 months later, I moved to another city. I never spoke about that night again, and if anyone asks me what happened at Leach Funeral Home, I only say one thing. There are things we shouldn't see, and presences that should never be awakened. Terrifying, isn't it? After spending a night next to a coffin that felt alive, anyone would think twice before working around the dead again. But some people live with that kind of thing every day, and they see stuff that's even more disturbing. The next story takes you behind the scenes of real-life funeral service work, and trust me, it's not easy to listen to. The first time I saw a body disfigured by a dog attack, I was eating a tuna sandwich on my break. I had to throw it away right then. I've never been able to smell tuna again without remembering that. When I got into this line of work, it wasn't out of vocation or anything like that. I just needed a stable job to pay the bills. And well, working at a funeral home seemed calm enough, at least on paper. My first day was pretty calm, a simple wake, an elderly lady, soft music, flowers everywhere, and people crying quietly. But gradually I saw that not every day is just silence and memories. There are cases that stick with you in a strange way. It's not just the sadness. It's what lingers in the air. A heavy energy, as if the pain had clung there and didn't want to leave. Cases with children, for example, are the worst. I say that without a doubt. A baby who barely got to live and is already there on a cold slab, waiting for a casket that's too small. I remember one that arrived on a cold morning inside a thermal bag, covered with a blue blanket. The mother had left him with the babysitter, and when she returned, well, there was nothing more to be done. A pit bull attack. The boy's face no longer looked like a face. It was just flesh, bruises, and baby teeth still in the gums. We had to reconstruct everything using funeral putty, cosmetics, and an old mold we had saved for such cases. I spent hours adjusting the details, trying to give some peace to that family. But deep down, I knew nothing would fix that. You learn quickly not to get attached, but some days that's harder. Like when dealing with bodies in advanced decomposition. There was a woman they found in the bathtub after 3 weeks. The water had turned into a thick, greenish-brown mixture. The body was swollen, the skin peeling off in patches, and the smell. It's indescribable. It's a stench that gets into your nose, your eyes, your clothes, and seems to stick to your soul. I carried that smell with me for days, even after washing everything. Then there's what we call purging, which happens when the body's fluids start coming out of every possible orifice. Nose, mouth, ears. It's as if the body is vomiting death. Sometimes, when we move the body to place it in the casket or to dress it, the air trapped in the lungs escapes with a hoarse sound, like a moan. We call it the death moan. Newcomers always get startled. It seems like the deceased is trying to say something. I almost dropped the body on the floor the first time I heard it, and it doesn't stop there. One of the worst cases I had was an obese man who'd been dead inside his house for over a week in the summer. When they opened the door, the neighbors had already called pest control, thinking there was some dead animal there. The floor of his bedroom had caved in from the weight and decomposition. The fluids had leaked through the floorboards, seeping down to the floor below. We had to use a shovel to collect parts of the body that had already come loose. I vomited twice that day, even with a mask and everything. After a while, I started working in the crematorium as well. I preferred the morning shift. Fewer people around, more silence. But it was a strange silence, the kind that seems to hide something. Sometimes during the cremation process, I would hear cracks from the machine that weren't normal. Once, I swear, I heard a kind of very low whisper. I went to the furnace door and looked through the glass, just the fire inside, dancing over the bones that still resisted the heat. But what really got to me was a mark that appeared on the glass door. It was like a grease stain, but with a shape. It looked like a hand, but the fingers were too long. I cleaned it with disinfectant, scrubbed it with a cloth, and still, the mark came back, always in the same place. I started noticing this every time I cremated a body alone, with no family around. As if that, or someone, didn't really want to leave. There was one particular morning that marked me. I was placing an old man's body inside the chamber, and I felt something strange, like pressure on my back, as if someone had leaned against me. I turned around immediately, but there was no one. Just the glass was fogged up, with that same mark as before. Since then, I couldn't ignore that feeling of a spiritual presence. There was always something there with me, watching as if it wanted to be remembered or refused to disappear. I started doing something I can't quite explain. Before each cremation, I would stop for a few seconds and look closely at that glass. I looked for the mark. Sometimes it was already there before the body even entered, as if something was waiting for me, day after day. And every time I saw it, it was as if a part of me went away too. It got to a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every time I crossed the crematorium door, I felt the air denser, as if the environment had saturated with some negative energy. It wasn't fatigue. It wasn't paranoia. It was as if that place was impregnated with something that didn't want to be forgotten. And the weirdest thing was that it only happened to me. I discreetly asked the other employees, but no one seemed to notice anything. To them, it was just a furnace and an on button. Only I saw the mark. Only I felt the weight in the air. One Tuesday, very early before sunrise, a body arrived that made me uneasy just by looking at it. A young man in his early 30s who had been found dead in the basement of his house. The official cause was an overdose, but the body had strange scratches on the chest and arms. Deep scratches, as if he had tried to tear something out of himself. His face still had an expression of panic, his eyes half open, as if he had seen something horrible just before dying. And the record said that the cremation would have no relatives present. It was just him and me. When it was time to put the body in the furnace, I felt resistance, as if the cart had jammed on a smooth part of the floor. I pushed a little harder and slowly moved it until I heard that metallic sound of the grate engaging on the track. But when I turned to close the door, the mark was already there, right in the center of the glass. And this time, it was dripping, as if it had been left by a wet hand. I froze for a few seconds, just staring at it. The fire hadn't even been lit yet. I started the machine, almost automatically, and stood there, watching through the little window. And that's when it happened. Amidst the flames, I saw the body move. It wasn't a spasm. It wasn't a reflex. It was a conscious movement. The face turned in my direction, not fully, but enough to make me take 2 steps back. The head tilted slightly as if staring at me through the glass. And then from the chamber's speaker, which had never emitted any sound other than safety beeps, came a rough, drawn-out noise. It sounded like a lament, a muffled scream coming from inside the furnace. That sent chills down my spine. The sound lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make me want to run out of there. But I couldn't move. I stood frozen, staring at that fire, until the mark began to slowly fade, as if it were being erased from the inside out. When it disappeared completely, I felt a strange relief, as if I had been released from something. But there was also a void, an uncomfortable feeling that something had passed through me and taken a part of my lucidity with it. After that day, everything was different. The mark didn't appear anymore. I didn't hear any more sounds, didn't feel any more presence. But instead of relief, this made me more suspicious. It was as if that had ended for me, but not naturally. More like it had moved on, and worse, as if it had chosen another path. The following week, I requested a transfer to the wake department. Anything was better than being there alone, in the heat of that furnace, hearing what shouldn't be heard. They put me in a small room where I was responsible for preparing the environment, receiving families, those kinds of lighter things. But one day, while I was arranging the flowers at a private wake for a lady who had died of natural causes, a little girl approached me. She must have been about 5 years old, dressed in black, holding her mother's hand. She looked me in the eyes and asked, "Mister, why do you smell like fire?" I froze. The place smelled strongly of lilies and incense. There was no way she could smell anything. I took a deep breath, smiled awkwardly, and asked, "What fire, little one?" She pointed at me and said, "The fire from that glass, where the hand that cries is." That broke me inside. I never had peace again. Even outside the crematorium, even without the mark on the glass, even far from that furnace, it seemed like something still followed me. As if I had opened a door and hadn't realized that, on the other side, someone was also waiting for it to open. Since then, every time I close my eyes, I see that face turning in the fire. And every time I hear a dry noise, a crack, or feel a strange heat behind me, I wonder if it wasn't me who stayed there, on the other side of the glass, and what came out isn't me anymore. So bizarre. When death becomes routine, the most grotesque details start to feel like just another part of the job. But sometimes, it's not the body that's scary. It's the feeling that something else is still hanging around. Like in the next story, set in a morgue where not every presence can be explained. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, that probably means you're enjoying these stories. So go ahead and hit that like button to let YouTube know you're into this kind of content, and so you never miss another horror story. There was something wrong that early morning, and I felt it even before I noticed anything strange. It was as if the silence was heavy. Not the usual end-of-shift silence, but a thick, suffocating silence, as if the air was filled with something unseen. And when you work in a morgue, that kind of feeling doesn't come out of nowhere. It was around 3:30 in the morning. I was alone in the preparation area of the medical school in Southern California, finishing up reports on a complicated case. It was my third straight week on the night shift. I liked working at night. No noise, no people wandering the halls, no one to get in the way. Just me, the bodies, and that morbid peace that to me had become routine. The morgue was quite secure. Doors locked with magnetic cards, cameras in all the hallways, restricted access. Only me, Alan, and the head of pathology had access after 10 p.m. And that night, only I was scheduled. The fluorescent light gave everything that somewhat bluish, somewhat lifeless hue. I was reviewing the records of a newly arrived body when I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, something standing among the covered gurneys. A shadow, dark, rigid. For a moment I thought it was a reflection of my shadow or accumulated fatigue, but when I turned fully, I saw it better. A figure standing still, right in the middle of the room. I couldn't see a face or clothing details, just the silhouette completely motionless. I called out, first softly, then louder. "Hey!" No response. The figure remained still. I took a step forward, then another. I turned on my cell phone flashlight. When the light reached where it was, it vanished. It didn't run, didn't move. It simply disappeared before my eyes. At that moment, I tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, imagination, anything. But even as I tried to convince myself, I felt that horrible sensation of being watched. That negative energy that sticks to your skin. I went to the doors, checked the access points, reviewed the cameras. Nothing. No entries recorded, no strange images. I returned to the lab feeling a bit ridiculous but disturbed. Much more than I wanted to admit. 2 days later, it happened again. This time, I wasn't caught off guard. I was more alert. The figure appeared almost in the same spot. Now I could see it better. A thin man wearing what seemed like old hospital scrubs. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused, as if he were in a trance. That wasn't a human being standing among the gurneys. It was a presence, something frozen in time, a remnant of someone. I stood motionless for a while. I couldn't move. The environment became absurdly cold. The lights flickered, and before I could say anything, he vanished again. Without warning, without a sound. The next day, I told Alan everything. I expected him to laugh, but instead he paled. He pulled me out of the room and said, "You're describing Will Wood." Will was a morgue technician who had died years before in a stupid accident with anesthetic gas. He got trapped inside without ventilation. They found him the next morning, collapsed beside the preparation table. They said he had tried to get out, that he had banged on the door, but no one heard. And now, it seemed like he was still trying to be seen. After that, some rumors started circulating among the security staff. One of them said he saw a figure passing through the glass of the cold room and entering an area that was supposed to be empty. Another swore he heard knocks coming from inside a sealed casket. And there was one night when a medical student got accidentally locked in the locker room and said he heard someone calling his name, even though he was locked in alone. That's when Alan got the idea for the seance. He knew some people from the postgraduate psychology program who were studying spirituality and psychic phenomena. They scheduled a special night with permission from the administration and gathered in the autopsy room to attempt some communication. They brought candles, an improvised Ouija board, an audio recorder. I didn't believe in any of that, but I stayed. Staying silent was better than continuing with those random encounters. During the session, one of the girls, Riley, began to tremble. Her eyes widened as if she were seeing something behind us. She started speaking in a lower, different voice. "He's lost. He doesn't know where he is. He thinks he's still alive." The temperature dropped. The candles flickered even though there was no wind. And when she said the name, Will, everyone froze. She said he was confused, that he felt pain, that he couldn't understand what had happened, that he had been left behind. It was as if he were trapped there, wandering in that limbo between a routine that had ended and a death that no one truly acknowledged. After that, the room felt lighter. There were no more apparitions. Not at that level. But even today, with everything resolved, every now and then when I stay late alone, I feel that same pressure in the air, that different energy, as if someone were just watching me from afar, waiting. It's not a bad presence, not anymore, but it's not complete peace either. It's as if he understood, but still doesn't know how to leave. What a nightmare. What did you think of that one? Give it a score from 0 to 10 in the comments. I really want to know. Some people are afraid of cemeteries because of ghosts. For me, it was the opposite. I only started to fear them after I began working in one. Not because of spirits, apparitions, or any ghostly presence, but because I saw, with my own eyes, what happens when we try to control too much what should follow its natural course. And I'm not just talking about death. I work in a small cemetery in a town in the interior of Norway. It's cold almost all year round, surrounded by forests with few residents. Nothing too different from other isolated places in the northern part of the country. But here, there's a very specific law. Graves have an expiration date. This means that when someone is buried, the family has the right to maintain the grave for 20 years. After that time, if no one renews it, the space can be reused. It's a practical measure. The soil is rocky, cemeteries are small, and the climate makes decomposition difficult. We can't keep expanding forever. Most families renew. Others move away, forget, or simply don't care. And then, it's up to us to open the grave, remove the remains, and prepare the space to receive another body. It's a technical process with hygiene, safety, and respect protocols. But no matter how much we follow everything to the letter, there are things you never get used to. That day, we were going to reopen a grave that had already expired a few months ago. The records indicated a man buried in 1999. No family member had shown up since then. A common name, nothing special. I was with Lars, a co-worker who had been doing this for over 20 years. He always said the hardest part was the smell. Even after so much time, even with the cold, the smell of death is something you never forget. But when we removed the grave cover and started to dig, there was something different. First came the smell, strong, suffocating, but it wasn't the dry smell of common decomposition. It was a wet, acidic stench, almost like rotten meat mixed with chemicals. We looked at each other right away. It wasn't normal. We continued the work carefully. The layer of soil gave way slowly until the shovel hit something rigid. The coffin. Lars squatted down to check and saw that it was still sealed, but the wood looked strangely preserved, more than expected. He commented that maybe they had used synthetic material, which was already uncommon at that time. We continued the opening process. It was when the lid opened that things really went downhill. Inside, there weren't just bones. It wasn't dust. It wasn't just remains. It was the whole body, intact, swollen, deformed, but whole. The skin was pale, shriveled, the eyes sunken and opaque but still in place. And the weirdest part, it was wrapped in thick black plastic like industrial garbage bags, stuck to the body as if it were a second skin. We froze. I was stunned. Lars took 2 steps back, hand over his mouth, trying to hold back the vomit. The smell got 10 times worse. It was a kind of hot, aggressive rot, as if it were alive in there. The feeling of being watched hit right away, as if the dead man knew we were there, invading what was left of him. We called the cemetery's technical supervisor, and soon the area was isolated. The body was considered a biological hazard. A series of analyses began. The explanation came later. The plastic prevented air from entering, and with the cold soil, the body kind of cooked from the inside in a grotesque preservation process. The skin swelled, gases accumulated, and what was supposed to be a natural process turned into an abomination. We found out that, at the time, some funeral homes used this type of plastic to protect the body from infiltrations or soil moisture. But no one calculated the effect of this after 2 decades underground. Instead of accelerating decomposition, the plastic created a bubble, a kind of horror time capsule. I dreamed about it for weeks. It wasn't the body itself, but what it represented. A kind of refusal of death itself, as if someone wanted to keep that man there, trapped between the world of the living and the dead. We talked about ghostly presence, but in this case, what haunted me was the idea of a death that didn't end, a brutal interruption in what should follow its course. And there, for the first time, I began to wonder if we weren't forcing this control too much. Because at that moment, facing that swollen, motionless body suffocated inside plastic, I understood something that no ceremony, no prayer, no luxury coffin can hide. Death is only peace when we let it do its work. The following days were strange. The news spread quickly through the town, not officially, of course, but in a small town, you know how it is, even silence echoes. Some people started avoiding the cemetery, as if that had opened some door. We continued our work, but the feeling was that something had changed, as if the ground had become heavier, denser. I couldn't stop thinking about that body. It wasn't just the grotesque state it was in. It was the idea that someone back then thought that wrapping a dead person in plastic was the right way to bury them. Protect, preserve. I don't know. Maybe out of vanity, maybe out of fear of decomposition, as if accepting that the flesh rots was too much to handle. But there, looking at that up close, it was clear how much this attempt to preserve the body ended up creating something unnatural, a kind of prison. Lars started avoiding the morning shift. He said he woke up nauseous. One night he called me at 2 a.m. saying he smelled a strange odor in his house like the one from the grave. He asked if I had smelled it too. I said no, but it was a lie. At the back of my room near the window, the same smell came and went, as if someone had opened a bag of organic waste. I even cleaned everything, washed the bedding, checked the shoes. Nothing. The smell just appeared and disappeared. I tried to forget. I tried to think it was psychological. But the thing started to haunt me in another way. Every time I passed by that grave, even after it had been cleaned and isolated, I felt pressure in my chest, a negative energy that made us walk faster. And I wasn't the only one. One of the new employees refused to cut grass in the north wing, where the grave was. He said he felt a presence, that he heard a noise coming from underground. The following week, the city hall sent a biosafety team. The order was to cremate the body since it couldn't stay in that state any longer. When they opened the coffin again, even with all the equipment, one of the guys fainted. The body had changed, swollen even more, the plastic torn in some parts, as if it had burst from the inside. And the face, my God, the face. It was stretched in a way that looked like it was screaming. But there was no sound, just that dead, opaque stare, looking at the ceiling. They finally took it away. They said they were going to incinerate it in a specific place with gas control and all, and from then on, things calmed down a bit. But inside me, something didn't return to normal. The experience left marks, not just physical, but in the way I saw death. Before that, I saw death as part of my job, something inevitable, sometimes even bureaucratic. But after that supernatural experience, I began to see that we're dealing with something that goes beyond the physical, beyond flesh, bones, the coffin. The way we deal with the dead says a lot about our fear of accepting the end. And the plastic on that body was the clearest symbol of this. a desperate attempt to hold on to what was already gone. I started to observe other burials more carefully. I saw people crying more over the expensive coffin than the person inside it. I saw families fighting over the tomb, and I also saw a few, very few, who simply let the person go. Without excess, without plastic, without forced rituals. Just a sincere, honest farewell. Today, I still work in the same cemetery, but I'm not the same. I walk slowly among the graves, observe the ground, feel the wind. Sometimes I stop in front of old tombs and wonder what remained there, and what is still trapped, because there's something in that place that doesn't want to be forgotten. And there are nights when I still wake up with that smell in the room. Faint, distant, but present. As if the past came back to remind me that death, when unresolved, doesn't end. It drags on, it remains. And sometimes it watches us back. If you stuck around until now, then maybe, just like me, you feel that strange chill when you realize the world of the dead sometimes says more about the living. If you enjoyed this dive into terrifying funeral home tales, hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more creepy stuff coming your way. And if you made it to the end, drop a comment below saying, "Sealed grave," just so I know you're one of mine. Oh, and hit that like button. It helps spread these stories and lets me know this connection was worth it. There's another video right here that matches this dark vibe. Click it and come hang out with me over there. I'll be waiting.